School of the Orixas. EKORISA Afro-Scientific Pedagogy and Education. I love the Africa of my ancestrals and I'm proud to be Black 21st Century African Renaissance. Work carried out in compliance with Law 10,639/03, Afro-Brazilian and African Culture in Education. Ivan Polly OSUNFEM by ELEDUIBON. Pedagogy of the Orixas EKORIA Ivan D. A. Silva Polly OSUNFEM by ELEDUIBON reviews the sociology gives reproduction. Looking for alternatives. In a theoretical framework that would explain the phenomena I observed in the Living with the Ramakrishna Foundation, I came across the works of Bernard Lahire, highlighting, about everything, the book Success School Us means popular, at reasons of unlikely. Date from existentialists such as Sartre made me shock and somehow question the Bourdieu's pessimism and, consequently, the determinism with which this pessimism is appropriated by the academic environment, and I only found the sociological theoretical framework favorable to my own experience in studying Lahire's research. Another author who consolidates this issue is Elinor 2004 when he clearly delineates the differences between inculcating education and emancipatory, clearly observed in the examples studied by Lahire and in the reflection of Bourdieu, regarding an education system that needs to create new cultural relationships so that make it possible the emergence in new social relationships. Bernard Lahire's 1997 research, in the work just mentioned, consisted of verifying, through interviews carried out with families from popular areas in the suburbs of large cities' French schools, the reasons for the success and failure of students at school, taking as a starting point at national exam scores. Teaching French fundamental. Among the several cases studied by the author, I highlight three, in my view, relevant. First, the feeling of cultural inferiority. Second, the relationship of cultural strength. And third, an ideal case. Both the latter deal with opposite cases to the former, and the question of identity and cultural affirmation is central. Before expose the cases, the researcher ponders, in certain cases in failure school, conflict cultural it is double for the child. While to be socialized for group familiar, is it over their transports for universe school schemes behavioral and mental, that end up preventing understanding and creating a series of misunderstandings. But living new forms of social relations at school, the child, whatever their degree of resistance to school socialization, they internalize new schemes cultural that takes for the universe familiar and what they can, most or any less, according the family configuration, leaving her hesitating in relation to her universe of origin. School failure is then the product of a conflict both between the child and the school. How much in between the child and you members of your family? Lahire, 1997, page 171-172 quotation marks of author. Thus, Lahire points, in your search, for the fact of what one of reasons of success or failure at school resides at structure familiar, exemplifying, in both cases, this one factor as one of the determinants of student achievement at school. Another factor that the author exposes in the research, as a determinant for school success or failure, is the need for schooling from to any less from members gives family what serve of reference to the child, the way like the members give settings familiar live and treat. The experienced child's school, relating, sometimes, through him, his own past school experience, happy or unhappy, is shown to be a central element in understanding certain situations. School children. Lahire, 1997, page 172. The author's analysis highlights the issue of previous experience of the schooling process of the family members as a preponderant factor, which will influence the child's school trajectory. Therefore, if there is no such previous experience, the author, by the examples shown in his research, points out that the child will be at a disadvantage in relation to others, compared to those whose relatives had it as experience, especially if the experience has been well successful. The third factor that the author puts as determinant in the failure or success in school of surveyed students is the cultural and identity affirmation of family members in relation to the arbitrary cultural that is the school culture and, consequently, the stimulus they give to the child in the sense of these same affirmations cultural and identity. In the following excerpt, Lahire clearly explains what is this relationship. According to Search, the adults in the family sometimes live in a humble relationship with the school culture and with legitimate institutions and can convey to the child their own sense of cultural indignity or incompetence. But, on the contrary, they can communicate the sense of pride they experience in the face of the child's good school results, or then look with benevolence at the child's schooling, despite the distance that separates them from the school world. Family inheritance is therefore also a matter of feelings of security or insecurity, self-doubt or self-confidence, unworthiness or pride, modesty or arrogance, deprivation or dominion, and the influence, in schooling of children, gives streaming in feelings. It is important, one turn what? That social relations, by the multiple predictive injunctions they engender, are producers of effects in beliefs individual real. Lahire, 1997, page 172-173. Quotation marks of author. Let's see U3 cases, in between U25 studied per Lahire at search, what I separated for exemplify better the subject. The first case concerns a family of Portuguese origin, whose parents suffered from a feeling in inferiority cultural, given your origin, in one France where the pattern cult gives tongue. French language excludes and marginalizes them from their culture of origin. Fact for which they do not seek alternatives, they do not react, that is, they do not affirm their culture and their identity before the community. Of this form, allowed what your son did submit the oppression cultural of arbitrary cultural inculcated by the school environment, which becomes a reason for school failure, especially with regard to appropriation of the culture pattern of language factor of oppression by the child. Lahire, 1997, page 173, 181. In the two following cases, the author describes two families of Arab origin in which, in addition to offer one solid structure in values morals based in your cultures in origin, for at least one of those responsible has gone through some process of schooling and appropriation of a language in their cultures of origin. Contrary to the first case, they affirm their cultures and identities before their children, encouraging them to have the same type of behavior. Thus, resist the inculcation of the cultural arbitrariness of the ruling class, preventing their children marginalize their cultures or lose their references of origin, the basis of their constitution's identity. In these families, you sons has you best results at the exam national in between you students from means popular and same in between you students what participated of exam. And know it is first fact in who value their identities and cultures of origin who develop deficiencies in the appropriation of the normative variant of language, the culture pattern of language, which one wants to promote through the inculcation of the cultural arbitrary gives class dominant. Lahire, 1997, page 190206. In any case, Lahire, in his research, expands the importance of the need for identity and cultural affirmation, not only with regard to the process of appropriation of language, but to the whole process of school success or failure. Not shying away from it, after I went through the experience at the Ramakrishna Foundation, my own symbolic universe, through my process of identity and cultural affirmation, increased in such a way that, if until then mastered 3 languages with some degree of proficiency, I learned about 10 languages, mainly in time and what lived at Europe. In the 3 cases, the 2 from Lahire and the 1 observed at the Ramakrishna Foundation, where the identity and cultural affirmation in the process of appropriation of the normative variant of language, if an expansion of the symbolic universe through the reaffirmation of the culture of origin of the individuals in question. So that, while reaffirming their identity, the expansion and linguistic enrichment enabled students to master variant codes norms of the studied language. In this way, this process of appropriation of the normative variant of a language occurs contrary to what Bourdieu claims, without the linguistic habitus of these individuals be marginalized. On the contrary, it contributes to the enrichment and reaffirmation of their own references in origin. Of this form, for these individuals, about everything for you students gives Foundation Ramakrishna. Due to the methodology, the school is no longer the space for cultural reproduction which, in turn, determines relations of social reproduction. It becomes the space that, by enriching the universe itself symbolic and by reaffirming the identity of the group, it allows the normative variant of the language to be aggregated to the symbolic universe of these individuals, and not inculcated. Even if this variant, for these people, do not stop being a cultural arbitrary, it is assimilated and added to the universe symbolic of these individuals, through their cultures of origin. This gives a different charge to the relations of force that this cultural arbitrary, by being inculcated rather than abrogated, plays at the context of action pedagogical as an act of violence symbolic. Another important factor in this process of appropriation of the normative variant of language through the expansion and enrichment of the symbolic universe of origin of the individuals is that, at the node reproduce the culture gives class dominant, marginalizing the culture in origin from individuals, from the access to different social spaces, that is, both the culture of origin and the one to which the individual will have access to from the acquisition gives variant normative of language. In Bourdieu's example, the inculcation of the cultural arbitrariness of the ruling class in appropriation of language marginalizes the linguistic habitus of individuals who are not part of it, delimiting both cultural and social space. Just the opposite of what happens with the identity and cultural affirmation, which expands the symbolic universe of individuals and expands their cultural and social spaces, in a process of appropriation of the normative variant of language without the loss of reference's origin. Other examples in which this phenomenon occurs arise, for example, in countries such as Germany, between dialectal Germans and Hochdeutsch Standard, official German, and in Italy, between Italian's dialects and the Italian pattern based at tongue in Dante. At France in Bourdieu, occurs the same with you paths of Pays d'Ux, regional speeches, and au Francian French gives Isle in France, the region where stays Paris. When Bourdieu refers the inculcation in an arbitrary cultural in the reproduction, refer to this cultural arbitrary as close to the culture of the Paris elite and to the linguistic habitus of the ruling class Parisians as a normative variant of the French language, which is the largest influence of academic French. Bourdieu himself, being from the French countryside, suffered this process of discrimination, promoted by the inculcation of this cultural arbitrariness, for not being of Parisian family origin class culturally dominant. This, without doubt, had influence in your constructions and in your theories, so much in Reproduction Bourdieu, PASSERON, 1992 as in the Economy of Linguistic Exchanges Bourdieu, 1996. It is important to remember that, as far as the humanities are concerned, theories of authors, not infrequently, they are related to your own experience. Influence gives affirmation cultural and identity about a performance school. Other authors question and criticize the so-called sociologies of reproduction and the sociological determinism of Bourdieu's theory. Among them, I consider relevant, for the subject in question, the researches of Bernard Charlotte, especially the work on the relationship with knowledge. This author starts your constructions stressing what no it is possible studying a failure school as if study any sociological object, but that it is possible to study subjects in a situation of school failure. For many sociologists, explain a failure school it is explained why what and, at times, as you students they are led to occupy this or that position in the school space. Charlotte, 2000, page 19. This is the objective of the so-called sociologies of reproduction which, in different forms, developed in the years 1960s and 1970s, with emphasis on aspects of the work The Reproduction, by Bourdieu and Passeron, which, second Charlotte where it is approached finds your more finished form. Charlotte stresses still aspects of construction in Bourdieu what relate at positions school children of students and their consequent future social positions to the positions of parents, indicating that differences in parents' social position indicate differences in children's school positions and, in the future, your position's social. In this item, co-author quotes that, according to the theory of Bourdieu, there is the reproduction of differences. How does this reproduction work? Through differences. Differences in parental positions correspond to differences in capital cultural and in habitus provisions cited in manner what you sons will occupy. Positions many different at school. Charlotte, 2000, page 20, italics from the author. Charlotte criticizes Bourdieu's methods of analysis that simply seek a homology of structure between systems of differences, despite recognizing a relationship between school failure and social differences. In any case, it calls into question the statistics that determine the social position of the family, through the socio-professional category of the father, and the mother who, usually belongs to another socio-professional category is the one who has a decisive role in education of children. It is also worth remembering that, in France, in the case of immigrant families from the north of Africa, who plays this one paper it is the sister older. In this case, nor dad, nor not even the mother. In addition, he argues that the socio-professional category of the father, in itself, does not take into account influencing factors in school success such as the social position of grandparents who in the countries of origin, In the case of immigrants, they may have had very different positions from their parents in France, evoking, in a way, the importance of identity and cultural affirmation, seen in Lahire's work, as of from factors determinants of success school as popular media in your search. Others factors what has influence about O performance school from students, and that are ignored by statistics that only take into account the socio-professional category of parents in the matter of school failure or success, according to reproduction theories, are religious education and political militancy. This means that the analyses should not be restricted to the family position, but also pay attention to practices educational family, as stated Charlotte. Once again evoking Lahire 1997 in the context of religious education or militancy policy, family educational practices, as factors that influence school performance, are always linked, in some way, to the universe of cultural and identity affirmation of origin of the family. In this way, they reaffirm that the enrichment of the symbolic universe of origin of the individuals has a direct influence on the success of the assimilation of symbolic capital, which is the arbitrary of the school culture, without it being, in this way, inculcated, and in the consequent success school of individuals in the media popular. Charlotte also states that there are individual and particular factors that make two children, daughters of the same parents, of identical social positions, can have school performances many different. This depends more on the relationships that each one has in their social environment, with their equals and with you adults, of what in the position social similar. In short, Charlotte 2000, page 23 cites a set of dimensions that must be taken into account for an analysis of the performance school from the students, though failure school has something to see with the position social of family, without reduce that position the a place in one socio-professional nomenclature, nor the family the a position, the singularity and the story from individuals, the meaning that students give to their position, their history, the situations they live and your own singularity, your activity effective, your practices, the specificity of that activity. At the field of knowing, so much at the scope of meaning what you individuals confer to your position, how much at the scope of their effective activities and practices. I refer again to the research by Lahire 1997 that relates these factors as constituent parts of the whole set of identity affirmation and cultural, which are a constant in the unlikely school success in means popular. Charlotte goes further, and goes so far as to claim that social origin is not the cause of failure school, questioning the sociologies of reproduction in general, which, according to him, establish the existence of a statistical correlation between parents' social positions and school positions of children. It also states that much more is attributed to these sociologies than they said, and, in general, they consider that the position of the parents produces that of the children, which, in fact, is much most than he was effectively shown in Search in Bourdieu, for example. In this scope, co-author comments, if we combine these two deviations in meaning, translate correlation between position and social and school status by correlation between social origin and school failure, and translate reproduction by act of producing, we arrive at the idea according to which the social origin is the cause of children's school failure. There was an exchange of objects. These are no longer the positions, but yea the origin and o failure. O way of explanation also he was transformed. Explain though it is most show a homology in structure, but resort the a cause. This is how Bourdieu's theory and, more broadly, the sociologies of reproduction, were interpreted by public opinion and teachers. The idea of reproduction he was admitted, and it suits often of explanation for O failure school. If certain children fail at school, it would be because of their family background, and, today, of its origin cultural, that is, ethnic. It is true that school failure has something to do with social inequality. But this does not allow to say that the social origin is the cause of the failure school. Charlotte, 2000, page 24, italics of the author. In this passage, the author reaffirms that the theories of reproduction that create this determinism sociological theory, which existentialists spoke about Bourdieu's work, are an interpretation misguided and exaggerated than these theories of reproduction themselves. In fact, never came to say and claim. For corroborate it his position, we must remember the systematic gives violence symbolic, gives which Bourdieu and Bertrand 1992 speak. This is the imposition of ruling class culture by strength correlations that make it the only one worthy of being acquired and studied. At school, the inculcation of this cultural arbitrariness takes place through the pedagogical action of the teacher who, through its pedagogical authority at the same time legitimizes the pedagogical action and thus realizes the pedagogical work. In this way, it makes the inculcation of this cultural arbitrariness become fixed, for in addition from space gives living room in classroom and gives action pedagogical initial. When occurring in the education system as a whole, this process generates the reproduction of relationships cultural what, per your turn, has consequences immediate at the process of relations social. Therefore, what Bourdieu and Passeron's sociology of reproduction says is that the reproduction of relations cultural has immediate consequences in the reproduction of social relations and does not say in any the moment, explicitly, that the socio-economic origin and the social position of the parents determine the children's school performance. Bourdieu and Passeron thus center their discussion of reproduction on the fact that it occurs from the reproduction of cultural relations imposed by the society in which this arbitrary cultural to be taxed as something that to be inculcated necessarily, it is owed great responsible for this reproduction of cultural and, consequently, social relations. Bourdieu and Passeron, however, recognize that this cultural arbitrariness by the simple fact of calling it cultural arbitrariness is not the culture itself, but something they define as symbolic capital to be acquired as a condition of success school. That does with what let's believe what that theory of Bourdieu and Passeron points at. Inexorable variance of school failure, the parents' socio-economic position, as well as their cultural origin, are the result of the pessimism with which the authors saw the reversal of this framework and the interpretations that the Academy has given to these theories, which created the so-called sociological determinism, so criticized by other currents, especially by existentialists and by theories in Lehigher and Charlotte. As we have seen, Lehigher 1997 points to the possibility of reversing this situation exposed by Bourdieu and Passeron without contesting its validity through elements such as the family structure, educational practices and the schooling of at least one of the family members, serving as a schooling reference, and the child's identity and cultural affirmation this aids their community. In this way, for Lehigher, it is possible to reverse the framework imposed by the reproduction of social relations from these spots. I return, once again, to the experience I had at the Ramakrishna Foundation, in India, where watched situations that corroborate the theory in Lehigher. Symbolic, one variant normative of the English language, was assimilated from the enrichment of the symbolic universe of the Sanskrit and Telugu Indian culture, thus making cultural arbitrariness and capital symbolic were not imposed and inculcated, but rather assimilated as factors that enrich the symbolic universe itself. In this way, they did not reproduce the system of symbolic violence demonstrated in the theory of reproduction of Bourdieu and Passeron, because, in this way, what happened by the non-inculcation of cultural arbitrariness, it was not the reproduction of cultural relations, since there was no reproduction of culture, but rather, recreation from the culture itself and the universe itself symbolic, without what were violated, belittled or assaulted. Symbolic was added. Charlotte, in turn, argues that students who fail are not disabled. Socio-cultural, but that certain students fail and that, not infrequently, they are in families of high popular. However, this failure cannot be attributed to the family condition. As a proposal of combat to failure school us means popular, Charlotte, differently in Lehigher, in some spots, proposes one sociology of subject that he defines as being, the student in a situation of failure is a student, which immediately induces us to think as such, in reference the your position at the space school, to the knowledge, that activities and at specific school rules. But the student is the child or an adolescent, that is, a subject confronted with the need to learn and with the presence, in his world, of knowledge several. Charlotte, 2000, page 33, italics from the author. Charlotte defines subject as a human being, social and singular. As a human being, the subject is open to a world that is not just the here and now, he has desires and is moved by them, and it is in relationship with others beings humans, subjects like him. While to be social, subject born and grows up in the family be it biological or surrogate occupies a position in the social space and inscribed in social relationships. And while to be singular, subject it is exemplary single gives species, with a history, which interprets and gives meaning to the world, to the position it occupies in it, to its relations with other subjects, to their own history and uniqueness. The subject acts in the world and on the world. For him, knowledge presents itself as a need to learn and as a way of being in a world with people, objects and locations carriers of knowing, and in this relationship, subject it produces and it is produced per. Middle of Education Charlotte, 2000, page 33. We see that, in the construction of the definition of subject, Charlotte does not rule out the existence of being belonging to a social body, which brings him closer to both Bourdieu and Le Hire in this aspect. However, unlike Bourdieu, he defines this subject as a singular and single copy of the human species, which performs transformer about the world. In both cases, both Le Hire and Charlotte outline ways of reversing the situation exposed by Bourdieu. The construction social identity is one common concern to the two authors, being what Charlotte also pores over about the construction identity subjective. Another point in common between the two authors is that, despite criticizing the sociology of reproduction, none of them calls into question what Bourdieu postulates, with regard to the fact that the reproduction of cultural relations have a direct relationship with the reproduction of social relations. In this way, the consensus is created between Bourdieu, Charlotte and Le Hire, that the reversal of the situation exposed by Bourdieu's sociology of reproduction lies in the breakdown of the reproduction of cultural relations. And, on the other hand, the two authors who criticize this sociology, place the identity affirmation and cultural as a determining factor in this issue, a concept understood as the central point of this study.